Okay, what you're gonna get right here. This is me reacting to Dr. Harold Puthoff, nuclear physicist, owner of Earth Tech International, works for Tom DeLonge, works with or did work with, is an ally of Luis Elizondo and Christopher Carnegie Mellon family, Robber Baron Mellon, in the disclosure of UFOs and what the government knows. So this guy, this scientist, this nuclear physicist, Dr. Harold Puthoff, has been in the study of UFOs with. I seen videos of him with Colonel Philip Corso, talking who wrote The Day After Roswell. So this is my reaction to his speech in 2020 at Berkeley. So I'm a multitasker. I'm a huge multitasker. I'm playing video games over here, got another TV over here. This is my computer setup you're looking at right here. Got another TV. I'm playing video games, watching movies, all that stuff like that. But I'm listening, and you're gonna hear my reaction to stuff that Dr. Harold Puthoff, who works for the UFO program, had an employee who still works, and Dr. Eric Davis, nuclear physicist that did work for Earth Tech International, that was at Skinwalker Ranch, that, he's a consultant of the UFO program right now. That's Dr. Eric Davis, who worked for this guy, Harold Puthoff. And that John Peterson guy, heard about him with Catherine Austin Fitts, who audited the black budget. And supposedly Catherine Austin Fitts was invited to a meeting with this guy, John Peterson, right there. This guy right here, invited to a meeting with him where he asked her if she wanted to meet some aliens. And he's part of the Navy. And Bob Lazar worked for the Navy. And what we're getting now is the Navy's disclosure. I don't know. I can't imagine kind of what the ocean has to do with aliens if they actually have bases like the Unidentified Inside America's UFO investigation says that, Luis Elizondo says they might have bases, or they might be using water as a fuel, because you can split the hydrogen from oxygen. You'd be using hydrogen to power your craft or whatever. But the guy, John Peterson, is an interesting character. Runs a think tank, a Navy think tank. And I watched this video of Richard Dolan talking about how he asked Catherine Austin Fitts, who audited the black budget, if she wanted to meet some aliens. He works for the Navy. The same Navy that's disclosing UFOs. The same Navy. He works for a think tank himself. I'm going to react to the video. Like I said, I'm playing Xbox. I'm watching movies. And I'm doing a lot of other things. But I'm going to hear it just like you hear it. We both going to react to it at the same time. This is Dr. Harold Puthoff in the year 2020, talking about UFO crash retrievals, retrieved materials, and what the government knows. So let's pay attention. Let's check this out. This is going to be interesting to listen to say the least. Very interesting.
Dr. Harold Puthoff is an old friend of mine.
That's John Peterson.
Pretty close to 30 years.
Navy think tank guy.
Wandering around the world at different places together and sitting for hours on end at meetings. And he and I remember we were sitting on a board together in Las Vegas, and 27 times I went to Las Vegas in 3 years for weekends just to sit around with him and a bunch of other wonderful folks. And the reason why he's an old friend of mine is because early on when I was doing some work with the Department of Defense and wandering around doing a project with the Secretary of Defense, as a matter of fact, looking at new ways to think about the future. I ended up in some crazy place up in Colorado, where they were doing a new science convention, and it's a whole different story on its own, but it just blew my mind because I didn't know what I was getting into, and it was just crazy UFO things and all kinds of plants that talk to you, and it was weird. And you know what I'm talking about? Cleve Baxter was there. Can't believe it. And anyway, I heard about this thing about remote viewing, and it was this deep secret program, right, that the government had to use psychics to spy on the Soviets and the Russians and other such people. And so I had enough clearances and stuff and could poke around and knew how the system worked that I ended up out. And I don't remember even the details of how it all got together. But anyway, we hit it off, and we've been friends and been involved in all things unusual for a long time. And the thing, of course, that brought us together, in addition to remote viewing at the beginning, was our mutual interest in the whole issue of UFOs and alien life, and the possibility that there was a whole lot more going on in this part of the galaxy than most people understood. The importance of that relative to the kinds of reasons why we all come together here, or at least I hope that you all come together here, is that we're in this middle of this extraordinary transition. And there's a place 10, 15 years from now when it's a whole different kind of place that operates in a way different way. And part of the reason of that is because almost certainly human beings have started to integrate themselves into the larger community of civilizations that live in this part of the galaxy. And the reason why that's going to happen is because of this man and some of his friends. Because they represent the opening to this whole disclosure process that about what the United States government has been doing under the table for a long time. And of course, they've been lying to us, telling us, of course, we don't know anything about this stuff, but they did, and they were. And what Hal and his friends are doing are trying to put that on the table and make that part of the legitimate conversation that we all have, and in the process, facilitate this emergence and transition of humanity. He's a quantum physicist, and done a bunch of stuff, and he can talk to you more about it. But it's just wonderful to have you with us. Thank you, Hal.
Thank you, John. Well, I appreciate your interest and the fact that you've come here. So I'm very anxious to share what I have to share. And as you'll see from my message up here, backstory and forward story. There is a backstory about the government's involvement in the UFO, or we now call it UAP, Unidentified Aerial Phenomena program. But there's also a forward story where some of us who have been part of that program have banded together to try to get more data out for the public to have a conversation about. So I'm going to cover both aspects. Let me begin with the backstory. Anyone who follows the UFO area knows that, starting in 1947, we supposedly had the Roswell crash and whatever, and there were a lot of people calling the Air Force and saying, I've seen something in the sky and so on. And the public pressure was so great that Project Sign was set up, ran for 47, 48, to gather data from generally the public about what they were reporting to see. And that transmogrified into Project Grudge and finally into Project Blue Book. Project Blue Book, of course, was the longest running organization, ran for 17 years. But in 1969, Condon at University of Colorado was asked to set up a program to investigate whether there's anything that we should be taking seriously in what the Blue Book people had found. And they came to the conclusion, no, there's nothing here. Don't worry about it. Nothing worth following up on. And so basically, public knowledge about any UFO program ended there. And so if between 1969 and roughly now, if you sent something into the Air Force Public Affairs Office and said, well, what are you learning about UFOs? What's going on? They said, oh, no, we shut that program down in 1969. Truth of the matter, however, is that the very memo that shut down the program, written by General Bollinger, had down in the fine print of the memo reports of UFOs which could affect national security will continue to be handled through the standard Air Force procedures. So the truth of the matter is the programs continue.
Reports of UFOs
and are continuing today
that affect national security handled separately.
This has been very much under the covers, separate, no media associated with this and so on until December 16th, 2017, when suddenly there was a front page story on the New York Times talking about a program that had been going on called Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program. We call it ATIP. And this was an absolutely amazing revelation. They had good sources. I was part of the program. Thought it would never see the light of day, and suddenly there I am, even on the New York Times. And of course, with that kind of coverage, mainstream press, Washington Post, CNN, and so on picked up the story, and suddenly there's this big barrage of media publicity. The thing to realize is that this was a game changer. The reason was that the kind of people who are now coming forward, which I've listed here, ex-Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid, who actually founded the program, top-rated F-18 pilots who were encountering what we call advanced aerospace vehicles, significant Department of Defense and intelligence community officials began to come forward because of what had been revealed to answer questions. And so suddenly, this whole area via the media moved from being just the tinfoil hat crowd for news on a Friday afternoon when you don't have anything to write about, to suddenly, oh my God, you know, there's something really going on. The actual name of the program was Advanced Aerospace Weapons Systems Application Program, OSAP, but it went by Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, ATIP. So
Good, he burping and clearing his throat like me.
The actual name of the program.
I'm doing the same thing.
And how did this get started? This program began in June of 2008. The Defense Intelligence Agency was concerned about threat from advanced aerospace vehicles, crafts, and drones of unknown origin. The congressional budget was approved to address the issue.
Advanced aerospace
Senate Majority
vehicles
Leader
unknown
Harry Reid
origin.
and Senator Inouye from Hawaii and Senator Stevens from Alaska were the people who were basically in charge of black budget programs. So this was all done behind the scenes. The rest of Congress didn't know the program was being set up. So that's how it got started. And once the news came out, the New York Times, you might think that all these heavy hitters
they want to take it slow, but when they say things, you got to watch what they say. You said
The
advanced
statement by Reid, I think, summarizes the view of the major political players that were involved.
advanced
That is, we don't know the answers, but we have plenty of evidence to support the questions.
More
This is
advanced
about
than
science and national security. If America doesn't take the lead in answering these questions, others will. Well, the ATIP program had two concerns, two areas of threat that they were concerned about. The obvious one, of course, what are these things?
What are they? What do you mean?
Craft flying over the continental United States, and we don't know what they are. possibly off-world,
Possibly
possibly
off-world?
some other country has got advanced
Possibly from
technology.
some other country.
What is this all about? Now, you might think that that would be the major threat. It turns out that wasn't the major threat they were concerned about. The major threat they were concerned about is future threat. What happens if a potential terrestrial adversary, say the Russians, the Chinese, or whatever, achieve some significant breakthrough and develop game-changing disruptive technologies based on their evaluations of the phenomena, or maybe from sensors?
So, what he's saying is the threat that the government is actually worried about is some potential adversary, the Russians or the Chinese, make a breakthrough in studying these advanced aerospace vehicles of unknown origin that you see on a History Channel. So, a terrestrial adversary. Suppose the Russians or the Chinese make a breakthrough by studying these unknown advanced aerial space vehicles of unknown origin. That's what he just said. You gotta pay attention to what they say. They're not Russian, they're not Chinese, but you're worried that the Russians or Chinese will make a breakthrough in studying advanced aerospace vehicles of unknown origin. That's what he said.
Data or from crash retrieved materials, that's what they're really worried about. Of course, that's what the intelligence community and defense establishment have to worry about. That's their remit. And while they should be concerned, this is a paper, or actually it's a giant report about that thick that we were able to get out of the Soviet Union. This is all the way back as early as 1991. They have had a massive program in the black, just like we did, trying to figure out what this is all about. And this report has tons of units and academic institutes and research institutes that were involved in assessing various aspects. So this is a big deal. And of course, the DIA and others in the intelligence community understood that that was going on. And so, to give an example, which probably most of you have seen because it's been in the news a lot lately, the investigations of the Nimitz carrier group operating off of San Diego. And several occasions, these advanced aerospace vehicles would descend rapidly from 60,000 feet to 50 feet above the water, hover, and then take off. I mean, absolutely astounding kinds of things.
Now, when he just said that, I actually heard on Unidentified it's 80,000 feet these vehicles were descending from. 80,000 feet. And then not only that, when you talk about feet, you're talking about 5,280 feet is a mile. So when you say 80,000 feet, you mean about 13 miles above Earth. 13 miles above Earth, and then descending down to 50 feet above the water in front of Commander David Fravor. Instantly. Dropping to 50 feet above the water from 13 miles above Earth. That's what he just said. That's exactly what he just said. So you got to take that and listen to what he just said. But again, that's a well-respected guy. That's Dr. Harold Puthoff, nuclear physicist.
And one of these times, a couple of F-18s were launched from Princeton, USS Princeton, and vectored by overhead AWACS planes to investigate and see what was this. Can you get eyes on? And so, in fact, they got to where they were targeted to see if they could see something. And sure enough, one of the F-18 pilots actually got a good view. The object was hovering kind of over the water, and he went right down to check it out. And suddenly, it took off to the horizon in a couple of seconds. I mean, he was absolutely amazed. What he described was that there was an elongated craft, sort of like a Tic Tac, the kind of candy you can eat. solid white, smooth, no edges, about 46 feet in length, about the size of his F-18, uniformly colored, no appendages sticking out like wings or tails or whatever. They were stealthy. The F-18 radars couldn't obtain lock, but forward-looking infrared radar could track while it was stationary at lower speeds. Forward-looking infrared radar just picks up the heat signature. And so even though there was no radar lock or whatever, I mean, it did have a temperature above that of the surrounding volume of space, and so it would stand out on a FLIR radar. And it appeared to demonstrate advanced acceleration or dynamic propulsion capability, zipping around. Navy Commander Dave Fravor has been on the news, and you can find interviews of him, several in fact, on the internet. He was the first pilot to actually get there and see what was there to see. And, of course, he had a wingman who also saw it. And he had another plane who was watching from above. And there was this event occurring. He did not have a FLIR radar on his particular F-18. So when they landed back at the carrier, he told the next flight of people going out, you know, I saw this thing. See if you can get out there and get a picture, because you've got your FLIR radars operational. And so on the second flight out, in fact, they did capture this picture. And I have to realize this is on infrared video, see a heat signature. Now, if this was some kind of propulsion of anything, we can imagine like hot gases coming out the back or whatever, you would see that kind of a plume. And so the big mystery here was you just had the craft, and it was hovering, and it's not obvious what its propulsion system was. You see no evidence of it. So when they came back from their flight and they showed Dave Fravor this picture, he said, yeah, well, that's basically what it looked like when I saw it up relatively close range.
So what he said was, you know, Commander David A. Fravor went out and he was vectored in to check out the UFO above the ocean. And for some reason, his F-18 Super Hornet was kind of ghetto. It didn't have operational video hooked to the internet that could link in, and his GoPro wasn't working or something. And so it was 4 of them. And you can see Commander David A. Fravor talk about it. It was four of them. Him and his Wizzo, with his weapons system operator, they call them Wizzos. Him and his Wizzo on one F-18 Super Hornet, and then there was another pilot and his Wizzo. That's 2 F-18 Super Hornets with 2 Wizzos in the back. So these are 4 people in 2 planes. And they both saw him eyes on, but they didn't have operable cameras or GoPros. He forgot to put on his GoPro helmet. And so they sent another plane out, and that's the video that you see on CNN, MSNBC. And that guy has also been interviewed as well by Jeremy Corbell. So there's an interview with the pilot who actually got the video, and that interview is done by Jeremy Corbell on YouTube, and I saw that too. So that's what he's saying.
Now you might think 2004, I mean, why are we talking about things that happened a long time ago? It didn't stop. Over the decades, lots of views of this happening with the F-18 pilots. More recent times, 2015, 2016, you've got the carrier group, USS Roosevelt in this case, operating off the east coast of the United States. And they see the same things, actually interfering with their missions. There have been cases where a couple of F-18s are going along and something disappears or zips through and disappears right between them. And so it actually became an air safety issue. And that's part of what led to some additional publicity, I guess you would say. This is displayed on the web and various TV shows, so I'm sure you can hunt it down and learn about it. So we had FLIR displays recorded, detailed debriefs of the pilots, for example, Commander Dave Fravor. He had like 12 planes under his group, 300 people reporting to him. He was a top commander of this Air Force group. The key assessments were an advanced aerospace vehicle, no known air vehicle in inventory of U.S. or foreign nation, low observable characteristics, stealthy.
He said the key observations was advanced aerospace vehicle of unknown origin, not to be known in the inventory of the United States of America, nor any other terrestrial nation, country on Earth. That's what he just said. What they have on videotape is not in the United States possession or inventory of aircraft, nor do they know of that, of any other country having possession of any vehicle that resembles that, and they can do facial recognition on an aircraft too. They have the capability to put a camera on an aircraft and tell you exactly what it is, like they can your face. That's what he just said.
Advanced performance, advanced propulsion capability to remain stationary, transition to horizontal vertical velocities far greater than any known aerial vehicle, and with no or little signature. So that's what the DIA had to contend with. So how are we going to figure out what's going on? So for this particular program, the latest of many programs, they put out a broad area announcement in 2008 and said we want 12 potential threat areas to be evaluated. Lift, propulsion, control, human effects, human interface, armament, whatever. And so a request for proposal went out to the defense industry and the intelligence community. And DIA chose Bigelow Aerospace as a contractor to address the potential threat. Now some critics out there said, no, wait a minute, I mean, Harry Reid was senator from Nevada, and Bob Bigelow was an aerospace person, was located in Nevada. Wasn't this just some kind of sweetheart deal? And the answer is no. I mean, Bigelow had already had a large program that he had put his own money into for years. In fact, John and I were a part of being on his science advisory board. And so it was actually the DIA chose Bigelow. They felt he would be the person who had the right go-get-em attitude and, of course, had the right kind of technical environment behind him. So we set up a division of Bigelow Aerospace called Bigelow Aerospace Advanced Space Studies. We call it BASS. And of course, he's supposed to do all the things you'd expect someone to do if you set up a program like this. Where I came into the picture is that BASS contacted my organization, and asked me to collaborate as a subcontractor. Since with John, we had been on this science advisory board. We had many years of collaborating. I've been a science advisor to Bigelow Aerospace, so it'd be natural that he might think of choosing me. The particular area that I took responsibility for is based on this. There was a critical issue. As you can well imagine in these deep black programs, it's difficult for contractors to obtain expert opinion on critical technologies because there's such high level security and there's compartmentalization. We call it stovepiping. So you've got people at this desk, people right next door at that desk, and they can't talk to each other. And so, I mean, this really held back progress. So I was given the remit to try to break through this kind of issue. And so I was contracted to commission papers from experts around the globe. And since we didn't want to be in the position of going out and say, hey, we're trying to figure out this UFO thing, can you help us out here? I mean, the publicity associated with that in our block program would have been a disaster. So instead, I just simply went out to people and said, I'm doing a survey. Where will your particular application or your particular interest in your particular technologies be in the year 2050? And as far as aerospace industry went. And so if I wanted to know, well, what do we know about invisibility cloaking, I could go to the super expert, even if he's over in Europe someplace, not revealing anything, and say, can you write us a white paper on where's this invisibility cloaking technology going or whatever. So over a 2-year period, I let out 38 contracts. I'm going to show you the 38 papers so you can judge for yourself how technically oriented this program was. As you can see, I mean, some critics out there said, oh, well, that program was just looking at advanced aerospace vehicles. I mean, in the sense of, well, what are the Russians going to do in a few years or whatever. But of course, if you read between the lines, and you see you're looking at warp drive, traversable wormholes, and stargates, I mean, we're not looking for what the Chinese are going to make next year. This program is absolutely directed toward trying to address and solve, to the best of our ability, quote, the UFO program.
So we just said, there were 38 papers commissioned by the Pentagon. Those 38 papers had to do with warp drive, wormholes, invisibility cloaking, stargates, force fields, think laser technology. Those things had to do with things that are observed from UFOs messing with our nuclear warheads, and that the pilots are encountering. But if you pay attention to the 38 papers that the government of the United States of America had petitioned from 38 of the world's best scientists that are unclassified papers, actually, those 38 papers that they had commissioned are absolutely involving UFOs. They're not looking at what the Russians and Chinese are doing. When you're talking about wormholes, stargates, warp drives, invisibility cloaking, they're not talking about Russian Chinese. They're talking about aircraft that pilots are encountering that have been known since like 2010, when there was that nuclear when the nuclear officers that guard the nuclear warheads at military bases came out with I forget what's the name there, wrote that nukes, UFOs and nukes. What's the name? Robert Hastings. He's talking about the incidents we have at nuclear weapons facilities with UFOs where they're deactivating our nuclear warheads. That's been recorded for 50 years. That's what he's talking about. So it's interesting, that's all coming to light. So that's interesting to hear.
Problem. Another set of papers. We were into looking at the forefront areas of everything. In case you have any resonance with people who say, well, no, this is just looking at advanced aircraft production. Well, then how do you explain that we had a whole program on evaluating the statistical Drake equation, which is an estimate of how many intelligent civilizations are there capable of technological advance in our galaxy? This is definitely a UFO program, a UAP program, as we call
See, he just took that a step further. He just clarified it again. When he just said that, he just took it a step further. He said that this program required a whole statistical Drake equation to figure out how many societies are there in our galaxy capable of getting here and capable of interstellar travel. They had a whole paper. They redid the Drake equation because this technology that the pilots are witnessing on forward-looking infrared and videotaping and TV capture is not ours, and it's not anyone else's. So they redid the Drake equation based upon that evaluation. Is what he's just telling me. This is totally UFOs. That's what he's saying.
These papers were collected together and put out as a series of defense intelligence reference documents. They were put up on a special server called JWIX. As you see here, they were unclassified, but for official use only. So contractors and defense officials, intelligence community officials, they could all go in and read these papers. Now, the DIA often does these DIRDs, as we call them, Defense Intelligence Reference Documents. Typically, a series of papers will go up for, let's say, a couple months, 3 or 4 months, and then they're taken down, replaced with something else. Our 38 papers turned out to be the hit bonanza. Years went by, and they were still on there being looked at every day, practically. So this is really quite a hit series because they're very advanced, technical, detailed papers on all kinds of things.
What he just said right there, I'm very happy to hear that the people who work for the CIA, the DOD, NSA, and all types of 3-letter agencies were interested in those papers and were going to the JWIX websites, those classified websites, to look at those papers and studying those papers. That's enlightening. That's good. I would want people in those positions to be studying those highly advanced papers that have to do with warp drive, wormholes, stargates, invisibility cloaking, lasers, all types of things like that. Those 38 papers, I would want those people constantly looking at those papers and trying to figure out what they can do with them. Because those are probably 38 of the best scientists in the world writing those papers for the United States government. So that's good to hear. Oh, yeah, that's good to hear.
That would be of interest in the community. So let me give you a couple examples. We have one here called metamaterials for aerospace use. I can talk about an open source sample. I can't talk about others. And many of you have probably, if you've seen various TV programs and interviews and so on, you'll know about this. There was a sample that was sent anonymously by a military source. He claimed that his grandfather had been involved in a crash retrieval operation and had gotten some material from it. And so he didn't want to identify himself, but he sent it forward for analysis. That's what it looked like. It's a multi-layered piece of material. And Linda Howe was the one who got it and began shopping it around. And
I just felt it interesting to pause and say that's the one that Tom DeLonge and Luis Elizondo and Hal Puthoff himself show on Unidentified Inside America's UFO Investigation. That's the multi-layered piece of bismuth, magnesium, and zinc, layered at an atomic level. That piece right there that he's showing right there, it's layered in a way that has to be 3D printed. Except the only problem with that is they collected from, somebody gave it to Art Bell on the Coast to Coast show, who later gave it to Linda Moulton Howe, who later gave it to Tom DeLonge in the TTSA group. But it's a 3D printed material that was collected from a crashed UFO in the 1940s. You got time traveling people here. Whose is that piece of multi-layered, curvatured, layered at an atomic level? Bismuth, magnesium, and zinc sample. Y'all listen to Linda Moulton Howe talk about that sample too. We can't make that sample today. No one can make that.
Trying to get analysis of it. She's really a stalwart person to try to find out about this. It had layers of bismuth. The size of that is less than a human hair. Those are the black areas you can see through here. And then they were separated by layers of magnesium, which are the lighter areas. And so that's what the sample actually looks like. Been a lot of controversy, a lot of discussion about this, because after all, here you see something that does look like it's in a crash. The thin lines were the bismuth lines. So, what do we really know about it? The chain of custody is non-existent. Providence is questionable. So for all we know, it could be a hoax. It could be a fraud. It could be some slag from a foundry floor, some factory. But nonetheless, it was an unusual sample. So we decided, okay, well then we should at least take a look at it, have an open mind. Early on, Linda Howe, the researcher who had this sample given to her by Art Bell, went around to many institutions and groups to try to get some analysis. First of all, a survey of academic publications, interviews with people from organizations involved in special materials and so on. He even went to archives of the national labs like Los Alamos or wherever. And nobody had any data on this kind of construction having been made. And then there's someone else she went to and they tried to see could they just duplicate the material. And in fact, they had trouble bonding the magnesium and bismuth layers together. So it wasn't clear exactly how you would make it. And then finally, in talking to materials experts, you say, well, let's just say somebody could make this. What would you use it for? And all the material scientists said, I don't have a clue. I can't even imagine.
So, what he just said was, even if you could make that piece of metal, that bismuth, magnesium, and zinc, with some layers of that metal being finer than a human hair, no one on planet Earth even knows why you would make such a thing. But it's a crash. It's retrieved from a crashed saucer. Is what the person who gave it to Art Bell, and then it was turned into Linda Moulton Howe from Coast to Coast. And his grandfather, the dude's grandfather that retrieved it from crashed flying saucer in 47, said exactly that. It was retrieved by his grandfather from a crashed flying saucer in 47 or so. But no one on Earth knows how to make that. You need a 3D printer that could make that, and no one even knows why you would make that in the first place. No one knows, not even this guy saying it right here. He doesn't know why you would need 3D printed bismuth, magnesium, and zinc layered at an atomic level, with some layers of it being finer than a human hair. No one knows that question.
Imagine a reason for constructing something like this. However, what happens is a couple decades go by or more, and suddenly we have our whole science of so-called metamaterials has been coming into the fore and developing kinds of stuff. And lo and behold, a paper gets published which says, if you have a bismuth layer of just this size. It happened to match what we had. And it was separated by magnesium layers of about the size that we see. This would have a very special property. This came out of metamaterial research, not directly associated with the material. So, it turns out this would make a terahertz waveguide. Okay, what's terahertz? Well, you hear about megahertz and gigahertz in the microwave spectrum, and then you hear about infrared radiation. Well, terahertz sort of lies in that no man's land as far as technology.
So, what he just said was, decades later, after Linda Moulton Howe got that thing from Art Bell, had it tested herself, then had to later on give it to Tom DeLonge and Luis Elizondo and Harold Puthoff himself, decades after Linda Moulton Howe got it from Art Bell from Coast to Coast. And the paper was written in metamaterials research not associated with that sample itself. It turns out that would be an excellent terahertz waveguide. We can't even make it terahertz, but it's a terahertz waveguide. We can't even produce that much power.
Development goes above microwaves, above gigahertz, but less than the wavelength of infrared heat. So it turns out that ordinarily, when you have a waveguide and you want to send a signal from one place to another, you have a pipe, for example. And the pipe generally has to be about the size of the wavelength, a half a wavelength, for example. Well, in this case, there's a frequency band around 5 terahertz, and the wavelength is a certain size. But it turns out in this special kind of material, those thin bismuth layers would transmit those signals at 1/20th the size of the wavelength. And so that means you now have sub-wavelength waveguide effects. So what that means is if you want to transmit a lot of data at terahertz frequencies, you usually can imagine a stack of waveguides to do it with. Now suddenly you've got this whole thing micro-sized down, and you can carry out your task. And it's only because of metamaterials being developed. Now, there were no metamaterials being developed back in the days when the sample was found, that's for sure. But anyway, so there's a possibility of this.
And you just heard him say it. When the sample was found, there were no metamaterials being made with terahertz. We can't even produce terahertz right now. That's such a large amount of power in a frequency, just under what he say, microwave. We can't even produce that right now. So when the sample was found, and still today, people don't understand what that would be. 3D printed material, printed at the atomic level, bismuth, magnesium, and zinc, layered finer than the human hair, layer after layer after layer after layer. What you would even use that for? Still don't know. Trying to figure it out, but still don't know.
Has an important effect. So actually what we see here then, and this happens in many cases, you get a material sample, unusual characteristics, and you want to evaluate it. The method of manufacture is difficult to assess and reproduce, as it was here. Purpose of function not readily apparent. But then our own science advances on over the decades, and finally we get to a place where we can imagine a possible
purpose or function not readily understood. But then after a couple decades, 10 years plus 10 years plus 10 years, our own sciences happen to advance to where a use might be understood. Not when we got it. We got time travelers, what is it? Because it ain't our tech, it ain't our metamaterials, it's not our 3D printed metals. So whose is it? That's what he's basically saying. He's telling you that. But you got to listen very closely what this guy say, because He wrapped in so many non-disclosure agreements, NDAs, like Luis Elizondo. He don't just say what he's trying to say. He gonna make you figure it out.
Purpose or function comes to light, which is what was the case here. We're still have this in the pipeline to do a lot of experiments on that haven't been done yet because we haven't raised the funding for it, but there's more to be done. Let me pick another one, space-time metric engineering. This is a mouthful. This happens to be the area that I personally was the leader on. The question is, can you account for what we're seeing based on known physics? And of course, all the pilots get back and say, oh my God, I can't believe these things. I mean, they're violating the laws of physics. They're standing still, they're taking off instantly, like they don't have any inertial mass. It's just, we don't know how that could even be possible in principle. Well, that's fine for the pundits and the media and even pilots to say, but the truth of the matter is, we can't account for them. We can't account for them. By taking an engineering approach to general relativity, Einstein's theory of general relativity. So what does that mean? Well, all of our electronic devices, this device I'm holding, your cell phones, the lights, whatever you want to say, are all using electromagnetism. And electromagnetism has its foundational equations, and everything that we have is really built on what the equations predict. And that's a completely mined area of science and technology. But when it comes to general relativity, Einstein's theory of general relativity, that's mostly been in the purview of astrophysicists who are trying to figure out what happens when black holes emerge or whatever. No one ever thought of taking the equations of general relativity, just like we have the equations for electromagnetism, Maxwell's equations, and say, well, suppose we could engineer those equations. Suppose we could build something based on those equations. This is textbook physics we're talking about, not fringe physics. So one of my jobs was then to make a list of all the weird anomalies reported about these objects. Actually, from my standpoint, the weirder the better, because if somebody is making up something that's fraudulent and a hoax, they're going to try to say something that's, kind of could sell, makes sense. But when somebody comes up and says, well, I was outside the craft and it was only that big, but when we got inside, it was a football field in size. So we list all the weird aspects that have been reported and list all what would be the weird things you would find if you could engineer general relativity equations.
A lot of times what I do is I'll just sit back and just listen to people. I let them talk. And I sit back and I just do this right here. Stroke my beard like this a lot of times. And I just stroke my beard, just sit back and listen to people talk. I let them talk themselves into a hole they got to explain what they just said. A lot of times I let people talk themselves into a hole while I stroke my beard. And they got to explain what they meant by what they said. So you see me doing that, I'm just doing that. I'm just stroking my beard and listening.
And they matched up hand in glove. I'll give you some examples. For example, warp drive. How about zipping across the universe? You always hear, you can't do that. It's you can't beat the speed of light and so on. Well, that whole thing about not beating the speed of light has to do with Einstein's special theory of relativity. But it turns out that in general theory of relativity, there's a way to do that. Here's a very famous astrophysicist by the name of Alcubierre. He was a Star Trek fan. And so he said, I wonder if I could find solutions in general relativity that would let me make warp drive. And I have a lot of constraints on that. I want to leave at breakfast time, have breakfast time at home, go to Alpha Centauri for lunch, come back and have dinner with my family, and I want them still to be the same age I am. And on the trip, I don't want to be turned into salsa on the back of the spaceship with giant accelerations. In fact, I'd like to just feel like normal kind of things. And so we worked through that solution, and developed what's now called the Alcubierre warp drive. He published this in an absolutely tier 1 physics journal that deals with general relativity. And so it's a very sort of famous picture of what his warp drive solution looked like, where you sort of depress space-time metric, as we call it, in front of the ship and build it up behind it and let space-time metric push you through, so on. So there's a whole cottage industry of general relativity theorists who are working on various forms of warp drive and so on. Well, what about the velocity of light constraint? Again, in general relativity, you can solve the equation and come up with something called, for example, wormhole. And again, I'm not talking about fringe physics. This is textbook material. Matt Visser is one of the great general relativity theorists. And if there are any engineers in the crowd, for the engineers in the crowd, I would point out that, well, what do you mean by velocity of light? Velocity of light is given by a little equation here, 1 over the square root of the magnetic permeability and the dielectric permittivity of the vacuum. So if you want to go past the speed of light, you just simply arrange to reduce the value of those constants, and now the effective speed of light in your engineered region is much higher. And so even though you're zipping through a faster speed of light as far as anyone on the ground is concerned, actually within your engineered space, you're not actually beating the speed of light, but it works in principle. So the take-home message here is reduced time interstellar travel either by ET or ourselves in the future is not, as naive consideration might hold, fundamentally constrained by physical principles. And it can be addressed in exotic physics and engineering terms, metric engineering. So you might well ask, okay, well, then why aren't we zipping around the universe? Well, unfortunately, when you solve the equation and say, oh yeah, all these things could be done, what would be the engineering required to do it? Well, and our solution so far is, oh my gosh, we have to have so much energy density compactified in such a small volume. There's no way we get there with our present engineering smarts. So,
Enter Dr. Salvatore Pang. Interviewed on the New York Post, I believe it was, by what's the name from the Ministry of Defense? The guy from the Ministry of Defense. And Brett Tingley from the War Zone. He wasn't interviewed by the guy from the Ministry of Defense. It was Brett Tingley of the War Zone, and they were going over Brett Tingley's interview from the defense website, the War Zone, interviewing Dr. Salvatore Pang, which holds the patent for U.S. UFOs. I absorb like 80% of what I hear. And that interview is on the New York Post, I believe it is. Post. I have it saved on my subscriptions, but yeah, it's there. You can check it out. But some people left out a loop. This is my review to Dr. Hal Puthoff. It's basically done right here. But you got to pay attention to these guys and see what they say. You'll learn a lot. Killer Kid Man, Xbox One. Get on there, add, subscribe, like, check out my jailbreak videos. You're gonna learn something you didn't know.